And I feel like if you want to have a stable society and a competitive society, and when I say competitive, I mean competitive in all realms, including safety, including having as many children as possible, not even competitive in a combative sense. I'm just talking about having enough kids to beat the reproduction rate, which we're failing to do in the West, and everyone being able to walk around without getting hurt. I think the way to do that is to be inside of our gender roles. I think that's the way it is. And I grew up, I mean, I tell you, I grew up in a place where the world was very different. I'm not even that old. I was 35, but I grew up in a completely different world. Like if a random man, a stranger, a neighbor, yelled at me as a kid, my dad would be like, yeah, yell at him. Like we were scared of our elders. Like my dad went to work, my mom cooked and cleaned, and looked after us kids. Like I grew up in that world. And people now are just trying to completely throw it out the window, and they seem surprised that society's falling apart in front of our very eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a verse in the Quran that actually says something quite similar to what you're saying. It says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Do not wish what the other one has. لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَ. For a man is a portion from what he has earned, and for a woman is a portion from what she has earned. And وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ, and ask God from His bounty, meaning do not attempt to encroach on the other person's role. Yep. Like men have been given certain things that women have not been given, and vice versa. Yep. And you know what's interesting that you talk about this case study example of islands, because quite frankly, I was looking at some statistics, and from the 1960s, where the second wave feministic movement became very widespread, until now, there's been studies that have been done. The biggest one is one called Blanche Flower and Oswald, which happened between the years 1970 to 1990. It was a longitudinal study. And you'd expect that after all the implementation of legislative changes and stuff like that in America and the UK and elsewhere in the West, that women will be having a better life and that they'll be enjoying their times. But the conclusion of the study, after they've interviewed 100,000 women, this is the biggest study that I think has ever been done, 100,000 women, in both the UK and the US. The conclusion was that women have a deteriorated situation. And in fact, even like the heads or the mothers of second wave feminism, like Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique, and others, even Germaine Greer, in 1963 she wrote the book Feminine Mystique, and then afterwards she wrote another book which people don't study in schools. She said it herself. Wow. She wrote a book called The Second Stage. She said, I'd done sociological experiments in the 70s, after the 60s, after the changes that have been done in the 60s, and I found that in the 70s, women were more depressed. Yep. 1/3 of women, she states this in her own book, she says that 1/3 of women were worse off. It was really interesting. There was actually a magazine, very famous magazine, that done a poll on women. And they said, it's called Top Satre magazine, and they found that 79% of women that responded said that they would quit work if they could tomorrow. Yep. 80% said that work is causing them psychological pain and distress. Yep. So in other words, this whole idea of prioritizing careers over motherhood and over being a wife and stuff like that, the experiment has already been done in a sense. Absolutely. And it's been done for the last 61 years, or 62 years, let's say, since 63. And in that time, what we found has been a tremendous failure. Of course. Which has impacted women's mental health, their physical health, it's impacted families. One more thing I will say is that I was talking to one guy he's done demographic stuff called Nicholas Wolfinger. Yeah. And I asked him what families are most stable or whatever, by way of like the children turn out to be most educated, and they're away from delinquency and criminality, these kinds of statistics. He actually said religious families, like obviously nuclear, traditional families, religious families. So we have the data to show that families that take this traditional role are clearly advantaged. They advantage women, they advantage children, they advantage men. Absolutely. So it is the model. And now you're saying something which is against it. Clearly it's not in their economic interest. And so is it the case that because of this they're canceling you? Yeah, I think it's because I'm trying to stick up for the baseline morality of humanity. It's interesting what you just said earlier as well from the Islamic point of view, that we're born with an innate good and an innate understanding. Yeah. I think that women innately, maybe the world has convinced them otherwise, but from my experiences, the only thing that satisfies them is becoming a mother. Absolutely. And nothing else is going to fill that hole in your heart. No amount of Sex in the City, Starbucks, makeup, Instagram likes, career, all this crap. There's a reason you are sad. And the reason you are sad is because you should have been a mother 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this is why you feel miserable inside. And this is something that females are born innately with, and society is trying to convince it out of them.
And that's why you have so much confusion in the world today. And like you said, this is why they ended up being less happy after this liberation than they were before. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't have free choice. I think women should absolutely be allowed to do whatever they want. But they should sit and understand that the matrix and the system, the propaganda machine that they're sitting and digesting is trying very hard to convince them to move away from their natural instincts. When you sit and watch Sex in the City about some 49-year-old woman with no kids who's having a great time and is 0% depressed on her 58th food that month, and you're sitting there watching it, they are trying to program you. And most women don't realize the level of propaganda they're existing under. This also goes back to the earlier point I made about Trojan horses, because this is how they do everything. Feminism was about give the women the vote, right? Then they sneak in all this other insanity. Let's not allow women to have kids. Let's try and convince them not to. Let's convince women not to respect their man and make him feel like a man in his own household. Let's convince women that they can physically attack a man on the street and they have no disadvantage at all because they're just as strong as a man is. Let's convince the women of this insanity, but we'll Trojan horse it in with feminism. So if you say, well, I'm against feminism. Oh, you don't want women to vote? No. It's the same thing they did with the Green New Deal, right? We want to save the planet and sneak the money in. So you have to also understand, and I wish people were more perspicacious that could understand that any agenda that the mainstream media is purporting, any agenda they're trying to make you swallow, there are hidden agendas and hidden backdoors in all of it. There always will be. And it doesn't matter whether it's passport for a particular injection. It doesn't matter if it's ideology. It doesn't matter what it is. They're trying to give you the surface level understanding that you can't disagree with, so that all the things you don't like come in, right? And that's the scary thing about feminism.
A lot of it is just a simple explanation that it's in the economic interest of the West and the elites. And it's no coincidence that second wave feminism really took off after World War II, where the infrastructure of these countries was damaged, and these guys were bringing immigrants from all those countries now. That, you know, that's why we've got so many immigrants and so-called immigrants, people from abroad, ex-colonies or whatever, in the UK or whatever it is. They needed women in the workforce, so this was a convenient ideology, but which has now taken a Frankenstein form, and which has endangered women, endangered children, put women and children both in a very bad predicament. You're saying something opposite to this. They're saying if this guy gets too popular, we're going to lose money.
Oh, completely. It's not even just lose money. I think it's more sinister than that. I think it's they're going to lose influence, and influence is the number one thing they care about. The reason that they push feminism so hard, a lot of people understand, is so they could double the tax bracket. They wanted women to work so they could double the taxes. But I think the other reason they did it that a lot of people don't consider is that in the modern world, in the world you live in today, in the West, you don't raise your children and you don't own your children. You've had these children, I like to believe, because you're in love with your partner and you want to replicate yourself and purport your worldviews. And the way you view the world, you want that to be instilled in this child. That's not the case. They wanted the woman at work because if the woman's at home, she likely agrees with the worldviews of her man. And that means the children are being raised by the mother and they're likely to adopt those worldviews. In the modern world where they convince a woman to get a job, the man to get a job, they inflate the currency so nobody can exist any other way because it's too expensive. The parents are out working all day. The school and the internet and the matrix raise your children. Your children go to school all day and be told things that you may not want them to learn. Then they sit on the internet and read things and watch things you may not want them to watch. You talk to them for 10 minutes at the end of the day and they go to bed. You're fighting with your 10 minutes against endless hours of the most entertaining programming or the most forceful programming. In school, it's forceful. On the internet, it's entertaining. Convincing them of ideas that you perhaps don't agree with. I've seen it myself on YouTube. I've seen a guy in America driving his car, and his kids were in the back seat, and he was arguing with them about an issue. And they was like, where did you hear that? School? He's like, why did the school tell you that? That's not true. And his own children are arguing with him because they learned it in school. Have you ever tried to take your children out of school? You'll get fined. You'll get in trouble. No, your kids have to go to school. You have to give your kids away to the school. If you don't give your kids away to the brainwashing, you'll get in trouble. And the reason they're doing this is because they want to control the youth, because the youth is, of course, the future of the world. And you have to understand that this whole idea of feminism, this is what I'm saying. You're saying women shouldn't vote. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we shouldn't allow children to be brainwashed. We shouldn't separate them from their parents to the point where they're going to absorb ideals. Like, and I've seen the Muslim community, the only ones standing at the gates of schools saying, you're not going to teach this to our kids. The only ones who will stand up against it. Because in the white Christian traditionalist of England, the British, they just sit there and let their children ship them off for programming. Just ship them off for it's insanity. You don't raise your own kids anymore.
Absolutely. And you know what's so ironic about this is that if you read the 30 articles of the Human Rights Convention, I think it's number 27 or something like this, which says that a human being has a right to educate their children, or what their children is educated about. So on the one hand, they're saying, look, you can educate your child, you can choose what education they have. But on the other hand, no, it's the state, the Orwellian state, the thought police that must do that.
Correct.
So they've got a contradiction there. But what's even more pernicious, I think, as you said, is that this is a religion. I mean, at the end of the day, I think anthropologists, maybe 100 years from now, are going to look back in Western civilization and say, an individual with these traits is identifying in this way. This is a mythology of some sorts, a fiction of some sorts. Yeah. And this is a religion of the Western world. They sacrifice the conventional idea of one God creating the universe for this preposterous idea, or this mythological idea that, you know, you can identify as X and you're actually scientifically Y. And they're now trying to put this religion on our